Hello, everybody, and welcome to Out in Comics Year 34, Mainstreaming. This panel has been going on since 1988, which makes it the world's longest running Comic-Con panel in history. We're even going for the world record in the Guinness Book of World Records. The world today, the comic book world, has become a celebrated part of pop culture. Out in Comics today is more relevant than ever before, and we have LGBTQ and LGBTQ plus friendly creators as writers, artists, directors, producers, actors, entertainers, journalists, colorists, letterers. What do their characters and their creations mean for diverse representation and storylines on comics and film and in television? In our politicized and sometimes polarized world, what kind of heroes do we need behind the scenes and on the page and the screen? In a year when both DC and Marvel are releasing Pride anthologies and queer representation is significantly noticeable, have we finally gone mainstream? Today we have a very diverse selection of panelists, and they will be spotlighting themselves as creators and the comics that they produce, and discussing the past, present, and the future out in comics. My name is Andy Mangels. I've been the moderator for 30 out of the 34 years, and I'm the founder of the Out in Comics panel back when it was known as Gays in Comics in 1988. And I was the first openly gay mainstream comic professional. It's been fantastic to watch over the years as people have come along and really revolutionized the industry. I'm going to introduce you to 6 of them now. First up, we have Danny Lohr, who uses the pronouns they and them. Danny is a queer Black writer and editor based in the Bronx. Their comics work includes The Queen of Bad Dreams for Vault Comics, Quarter Killer for Comixology, James Bond for Dynamite Comics, plus Champions, Black Panther, and Marvel Voices Legacy, and work in the upcoming DC Pride anthology. Please welcome Danny. Next up, we have Josh Trujillo, who uses the pronouns he, him, and his. Josh is a writer in the realm of comics, children's books, and gaming. He's written Rick and Morty, Adventure Time, and Dream Daddy, one of my favorites. He's been in the Love and Love anthology and the Ignatz award-winning anthology Be Gay, Do Comics, and lots of DC comics. He also co-created Marvel's newest queer hero in the United States of Captain America. Welcome, Josh Trujillo. Next up, we have Luciano Vecchio, whose pronouns are he, him, and his. Luciano is the Argentinian artist for Marvel's Ironheart and Champions, a writer and artist for Marvel's Voices, and a writer-artist for the brand new original graphic novel Sereno. He also coordinates an LGBTQ plus digital comic anthology called, and I'm gonna mess this one up, Sequencia Dissidente.
Secuencia Disidente.
All right, wonderful, thank you. I didn't do as bad as I thought. He's also a contributor to both the Marvel and DC Pride anthologies. Welcome, Luciano. Then we have Nina Taylor Kester, whose pronouns are she, her, and hers. She's currently the program coordinator at the Cartoon Art Museum and the co-founder of the Queer Comics Expo. Nina helps manage the Prism Comics Awards. In the past, she's colored comics for Boom Studios, worked with the Peanuts comics, and done PR for Archie Comics when Kevin Keller came out. Welcome to Nina. Then we have Sarah Brunstad, whose pronouns are she, her, and hers. Sarah is the editor of Marvel Comics Pride, which is a book that none of us ever thought would happen. Sarah has also shepherded books such as Black Widow, Captain Marvel, Mighty Thor, Immortal Hulk, and Women of Marvel. Welcome, Sarah. Then finally, we have the Cow, also known as Vincent Cow, whose pronouns are he and him. The Cow is the artist and or writer known for the semi-autobiographical Mondo Mango on Tapas and the Prism Award-winning manga webcomic about a trans youth magical boy, which is soon to be a scholastic graphic novel. Welcome to the Cow. All right, everyone. So we're going to launch into the questions here at Out in Comics 34. I'm going to ask each of you to talk about your involvement in comics by saying, and specifically as being a queer creator or a member of the LGBTQ family, by saying, what does out in comics mean to you? How has being out in the field affected your career, your writing, your art? What queer characters have you written or drawn? And what material do you suggest people look at to see the best of your work? And let's do this. We're gonna start with Danny.
Hey guys, thank you guys for having me. It's a super cool way to spend my day. Um, it was very funny when you first mentioned the question, kind of what does out mean? It was almost difficult for me to answer, but in a really positive way, because it's been part of my career since the beginning. I came into mainstream comics out and non-binary, and with my now wife, and I got to be very public about it. And while there are always weird people on the internet, because there are always weird people on the internet, I've been really fortunate in that all parts of my identity have been really appreciated in the industry from the start. That the ways that I speak about representation, both in my work and publicly on panels, on social media and everything, I think has actually moved my career forward in a lot of ways. I very intentionally kind of defined myself as someone who was not going to shut up about things early on. I've spoken about it a little, but one of the things I did, because I was publishing short stories before I did comics. So one of the things I did intentionally was, when people would ask for samples of my work, is I gave them particularly one or two stories that were very kind of in your face, either about Blackness or class or queerness, and very, very blatantly were like, these are the stories that I'm showing as my samples. So if you get annoyed at kind of what my work represents, I don't know why we were talking in the first place. Uh, and I always just try to represent queerness in all of my work. In the DC anthology, I was really fortunate enough to be able to be an early writer of Jess Chambers, the non-binary Flash that's there, which was a huge honor for me. Kind of sitting back and realizing I'm getting to write a non-binary Flash, that they're wearing the costume, and that eventually there will be someone who Jess is their first encounter with the Flash. Means a lot to me personally. I've definitely messaged my editors quite a few times, just chatting and crying about, like, happy tears about it. And that's just kind of where I've been. Being out for me is being able to write honestly, and most importantly for me, at least, is to be able to encourage others to write honestly. It's not just saying that I am queer, but being like, oh, someone's going to give you crap about being queer, like, let me know, like, I've got your back. Like, that is a big part of not just be that's almost like the difference between being out as an individual writer and out as, like, a public figure for me, I guess.
touching on what Danny said, being out in comics is about kind of honesty and kind of like the honesty to have self-expression. And I think there's a lot of self-discovery kind of in that too. In my work, I do a lot of nonfiction comics for the Nib or for other publishers. And I'm always kind of looking as to how the past relates to the present and specifically my own experiences. And I try to take that to whatever comics work I'm doing, whether it's Dream Daddy, kind of reflecting on my own personal relationships with other queer men, or Dodge City, kind of looking at a sports comic with more of a queer sensibility to it. I'm really excited for people to see the Captain America character, Aaron Fisher, that I'm doing this summer, because I think he reflects a lot of difficulties that our community faces. And I'm really excited for people to kind of see how he overcomes it or at least spins it into a positive. And I think that kind of extends to what everyone here does, is kind of finding themselves in their work and finding a way to express themselves in comics.
Everything that's been said, I think, is really rings true about authenticity. I think for me, as someone who's done a little bit on the creative side, but mostly been on like a marketing and event organizing side, it's kind of been, and I came up with this kind of crazy metaphor. If you've ever seen like an old Western where the hero has to like wrangle two horses and have like one foot on each saddle while holding both of them. I think one of those is, one of those horses that's carrying you forward is the people who have come before, who have risked their careers. When I came through into my career was a time where, I was advised by very loving people to maybe not mention certain things about myself, whether it was, my coming out or, you know, how I identify gender or how I represent myself. But, it was the world that it was then. And then, I started working and then I got swooped up. And I will mention one of those people that swooped me up was Andy, who came and found me at Comic-Con and introduced me to Prism Comics, which, Ted and others that came before built for us so that we'd have such a magnificent presence at big places like Comic-Con. And because of Prism Comics, I got to meet Paige Braddock, which eventually meant that I got to work for the Schultz studio. I actually got to, in addition to my comics work with them, I got to launch Snoopy on social media because of these queer connections. So it, if it weren't for those people setting up these connections ahead of me, then I wouldn't have had the avenues to be out and authentically myself and be able to say, I don't have to hide that part of myself going forward. Like the majority of my career now is because I'm queer, because people are looking for diverse voices, because I've done authentic things for communities, whether or not those communities are specifically identified as queer. Um, the idea of us having to work to build a community as queer people, I think, has also been a part of what has driven my career. So I wouldn't be half of the things I am if I wasn't doing that. And to finish my metaphor, the other horse that I am, that is propelling me forward, that is riding me into the future, is all of the immense talent and work and opportunity that those coming forward today are pushing us forward and wanting to connect with the Queer Comics Expo. It's always been a big part of mine to make it a place where both the previous generation and the current and next generation all get to come together and kind of continue to build what queer comics are going forward, what being out in comics means.
Well, for me, this question made me remember when I was younger, I used to work on less visible assignments like license stuff and things unrelated to me personally and that didn't require me to be out or anything. So in that time, I felt like I was coming out every like 2 months or every year when I met new people or when I went to an event or a convention. And especially here in Argentina, but in general, not too long ago, this was a much more cis heterosexual male dominated field. And I found myself in many situations where I was the only one surrounded by dudes and inadvertently like being taken as one of them and being participant in casual homophobia conversation or whatever. So I made it a necessity to be vocally and actively out. And that came hand in hand with paying more attention to my creator-owned work and finding my authorship, not just being just an artist, but being a more complete author and writer and having something to say myself. And that's eventually spilled on my mainstream work too. First, it was more on my indie work and my creator own, but I felt that same interest in queer superheroes, and I first started doing it with fan art and I don't know, redesigning all forgotten characters and showing it and doing like an art book or something. Actively asking my editors, like Sarah here, I want to do Weekend and Hiking, please, sometime. And eventually started to happen, and it's happening now. And I did the Weekend and Hiking special recently, and I'm in both Pride anthologies in DC and Marvel anthologies, and also working with Danny on Champions. And so I feel like, yeah, being out and finding this intersection between my work and my purpose is something inseparable now for me.
I feel incredibly privileged to have come into comics at the moment that I did, because truthfully, it never really occurred to me to not be out. I didn't really figure out that I was queer until I was in college. And I think that journey took me so long and already involved so many years of denial that by the time I started professionalizing myself, it just never would have occurred to me to hide that, because I'd already spent, 23 years hiding it. So I feel really lucky that I never really felt like I had to either. For all the problems that Marvel and DC still have, I've always been welcomed, and I've never felt, shamed or put aside in any kind of way. And at the same time, I get to be here at the moment that we're doing these anthologies for the first time, which is like, it's wild that we're doing it for the first time for so many reasons. I feel like we should have done it 30 years ago, but also I'm so happy that I get to be the one who like made that book happen. So yeah, I think what Nina said about looking back at the people who made those steps, who came out when it was way more difficult to do so, when they were really putting a lot more things at risk. I'm just really grateful to that generation, and also to a whole new generation of people who are coming up, because as an editor, when you enter, as an assistant, you don't automatically get to work with the quote unquote top talent, the Dan Slotts of the world. So your job is partly to come in and find your own people and bring them up with you. And I feel lucky that so much of comics is queer, and it's been really joyful to get to grab people and like pull them with me as best I can. So I guess that's what it is for me.
I also feel the same way, where I came in the privilege of coming in now. benefiting from the hard work everyone previously has paved the way for me. And I also just feel like so honored to be here in the first place because I feel like I've been invited to a big kids table and as a baby creator. And I started off just, posting 4 panel comics about my life. So I'm just being authentically myself, which is what Mondo Mango, my series, is all about, just whatever happens to me. And of course, once I got into a gay relationship, I was really open about that. And so that's what being out in comics is for me. It's just being myself, openly pan, but in the gay relationships and just interacting with my loved ones. And then on top of that, just being able to safely and freely showcase other queer characters, like in Magical Boy, which I'm featuring a teen trans man protagonist. And it's just amazing that I'm able to do that safely, and everyone's very excited about it. It's just awesome.
In the 34 years I've been doing this panel, there's been a lot of people who, it was their first time on a panel, or their first time being able to openly express who and what they are, and how they felt about things. In the 34 years since this panel was created, comics companies in the past had actually banned queer characters, and creators were afraid to come out of the closet. And this year, with Marvel and DC both doing their Pride anthologies, and Image doing a Pride initiative, and Boom Studios and Dark Horse doing a queer book, and so forth, have we won? Or are we a marketing niche? Or where are we? And I'm going to open this up to anybody who wants to answer. Just unmute yourself, and let's discuss that. What does this mean? What does this time mean to us?
I guess I'll go first, but I think if you'd asked me a few years ago, or if I'd been on this panel a few years ago, I might have said we were at risk of being a niche, or kind of as a marketing fad like blaxploitation was in the 70s or something. But I think now you can kind of unequivocally say we won. And that's really empowering. Like, the books are very mainstream, they're commercially and critically loved. Uh, and I think now kind of the challenge and like the opportunity is to do queer works that are like more nuanced and more specific. And that's kind of what we're starting to see now.
I feel like to a certain extent, like I am kind of agreeing with Josh, but I always kind of get stuck on using the term win, because for me, winning is what happens at the end of something. And that would imply that, like, cool, we won, do we start the game over or do we move on to the next one? And it's difficult to do that when talking about human personal experience. I think across, like my varied marginalizations, like I can't say that like we've won, it's all over, we don't have to worry about a thing. But at the same time, there is a sense of winning and success in going mainstream, because it becomes, one, easier for people to fight to do comics, to be in this industry and make a living off of it, but also to connect to other communities, right? And I think that so I wouldn't say we've won, because there's always going to be work to do. I think that the easiest way to backslide as a community is to think that we're done with anything. But what the work we're doing feels pretty darn good.
I would definitely agree with that, and would just add that I think that one of the ways in which we still have a long way to go is that we really still don't have queer people at the top of the companies that are controlling the entertainment. So in a lot of ways, when Pride is being marketed, it does feel still exploitative in that way, because it's coming from that perspective of let's make some money. And I'm glad that that Marvel and all these other companies are going, hey, these people have money, let's market to them. But at the same time, there is that like gross factor, because there's an authenticity there that until we've really rebuilt these structures, is still going to be there. And I think that we're a little way away from that, unfortunately. And we still see mainstream culture making a lot of mistakes, you know, like things are still really difficult, especially for trans creators, who end up getting often like pigeonholed into these, you know, very particular areas where we don't even necessarily go to queer creators to tell all kinds of stories. We go to them for one kind of story. And so I'm excited for the future to be continuing to break away from that. And like what Josh was saying, to not have to tell the same kind of story all the time.
Representation and the like marginalized voices in society, it's a never-ending war. Like we've won some battles for the meantime, but there's always a chance. I think if there's anything I've learned in the past couple of years, you can't take anything for granted. And as much as we try to teach that history and progress is linear, it's just like this crazy loop-de-loop roller coaster. And if you don't stay on top of it, then, you know, things that you had, you know, even, you know, whether it was yesterday or 100 years ago could be gone.
For me, this moment with the both DC and Marvel having Pride anthologies, more than a win, I mean, it feels like a positive, very, I mean, it is making history for me. Like this, we didn't believe would happen, and it's happening. But I see it more as a landmark, like a stepping stone to see what happens next. And I don't know what we can imagine after this. Also, your question and the history of this panel running for 34 years, it shows us how slow the processes are in mainstream. Always takes too long to catch up with what is happening in our real lives in the margins. And I was thinking, like, most of the people working in these anthologies grew up in a world where this panel existed and these conversations were being had. I don't know what will happen in a few years when creators grew up in a world with Pride anthology taken for granted, you know. So I'm optimistic about that, even if it seems to take too long.
I just wanted to quickly add, like, yes, we are going in the right direction. But like the LGBTQ plus community is like a huge community, and there's so much untapped potential of stories to be created, and we're just at the tip of it, and we could go so much further with all that. So that's my 2 cents.
Wonderful answers, everybody. I wanted to piggyback on something that Luciano said, which is in talking about, you know, what older creators deal with, and Nina mentioned this earlier. There are those of us uh, who really did risk a lot in our careers, and I know a lot of Eric Shanauer is literally my neighbor. He lives about a block and a half away, and there are a lot of creators whose names you don't see anymore in the comic industry because they're older, and because they've lived through those times and fought those battles, but at the same time they're kind of thought of as yesterday's news as opposed to the fresh newer faces that are coming out now. And you know, it's one of the things that I know some of us really struggle with, is how to continue to stay relevant, how to be noticed, how to be seen in today's market. You know, I mean, I've got gray in my beard now, you know, and you talk about 34 years does seem a lot of time for these things to happen. But there are a lot of people who the newcomers, you're standing on the shoulders of the people who came before you. So one of the things I have always tried to do is to try and make sure that people are aware of what their history is and the struggles that have come before and so forth. It's always wonderful to see that you know, creators respect that. So in your own careers, what aspects about being out have you found rewarding? What aspects have been challenging? Have you had instances where you were encouraged not to be out? Some of you have already addressed this, or to feature out characters or themes? Do the companies you're currently working for support you, and do they support your themes?
You know, Andy, you and I met when I was working at Archie Comics, and I happened to be there at the right time and to have become like best buddies with Paul Kaminsky. And he was in a meeting and they were going to introduce the first gay character, Kevin Keller, and it was all straight men in the room. And he knew that that wasn't the best way for this to go forward. So he immediately grabbed myself and another queer woman that was working in the art department who had been there for ages. And she and I worked together with Paul to make sure that the introduction of this character was more authentic to the experiences that were happening at the time. Was, you know, something that I was like, we have to do this. Like, we can't let this happen without our voices being in here. And later on in my career, I worked for companies that were just starting. And because I knew from my own experience that, you know, queer content is successful, that for every Archie subscription that may have been lost for Kevin Keller, there was a new one that started. You know, so I was trying to take that experience forward with me to other companies, and I still got the no, not right now. Like, we're not ready for that. Like, that's not a category we want to, you know, put out there as one of the main categories that we have here. And it's interesting to see because some of those places now, like, queer content is front and center for them. So it's interesting to start to have those experiences as I go forward in my career, and both positive and the like, hey, you could have been there like 5 years ago because I was telling you. And so there's this wondering of like, what is it for those places that I've been that have pushed back like that, that changed the tide, changed the decision making for them? What was the thing that made it possible for them to be inclusive and help the careers of people who are making queer content, not just by like happenstance having them there, but by actively supporting and pushing them, and not just being okay with it kind of happening?
I'll say that, you know, for me at Marvel, like I said, I've never felt personally, you know, looked down upon or shamed in any way. I have a really good rapport with pretty much everyone I work with. But there have definitely been challenges. And when I first came on as an assistant editor, one of the very first books that I got to work on was Gabby Riviera's America Chavez book, which made a lot of waves. And you know, that book was really fun. It's still got some great issues that I love to revisit. But you know, Gabby already had a successful prose career, and then writing for comics for the first time, she got doxxed and she got heavy online criticism. And Marvel was unequipped to protect her from that because we just didn't have the resources, and we were run by a bunch of men who, like, I had to go into rooms and explain what doxing was, you know? So I think that that's changed a lot just in the years that I've been there. Those conversations are way more in the forefront, but they're in the forefront because of work of junior editors for the large part. Myself, people like Alana Smith, people like Heather Antos, who went in and said, this is clearly a problem and we need to change it. And so those conversations are definitely still happening, and we're definitely still having the like conversations about, yeah, how do we market stuff? What's safe to come out with? How do we put things forward in the best light? And those conversations are still really uncomfortable. So yeah, I guess in that, like, I've had a tremendous number of positive experiences, and getting to be part of the America book was really special. But it always comes with this kind of weight still of, we're still figuring out how to really navigate this and how to protect creators and how to create spaces for them, basically.
I am really fortunate that right now, all the companies that I'm part of are really supportive and in a really like positive way are hiring me because they know who I am, you know, like in terms of like an identity. Like that sounded like a cocky thing, but what I meant to say was that like they know who I am as like that I'm very open about my identity and that I am very public about wanting to discuss it, be it my queerness, my speaking about being diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, you know, my blackness, like I'm very open about it, you know, and for the most part, places have been really supportive. What I have also noticed is in the past, because once I have this experience with a company, I don't deal with them anymore, is that those who are not, the books did worse, regardless of reviews on the books. And by that, I mean, when it came time to market and being like, well, why don't we do interviews with like Black sites or queer sites? You're like, trust me, I know my audience, you know, like I know who's going to come and read my stuff, you know. I came into comics while working in, you know, sci-fi and fantasy short prose. So like there are some times that I'm like, yeah, interviews in this place, even though you don't usually do them, would be really useful for me because that's the people who will come in and get my books, you know? And when they just kind of shrug and go, okay, sure. And that has always resulted in the, well, it was a good book and it got good reviews. I don't know what happened here. And it was like, because you marketed my book to a bunch of white straight dudes. I don't know what to tell you. like Queen of Bad Dreams, like, you know, like it did well and they knew who to market it to. And like, I'm like, the main villain is white supremacy. Like that's pretty common in my stuff. The market is set up where if you are a new or mid-range writer or artist, it is incredibly difficult for us to make a living. And because of that, it is incredibly difficult when we are given work for hire to make the time and schedule to do the marketing that these companies have, you know, in place. So you can't be shocked when you don't put the money behind it and it doesn't get the numbers that you thought it would.
As somebody who worked in marketing for a long time, especially with comics, and it's been really interesting to see that I think it's that same thing, like they have these existing avenues of marketing and they don't step back to think about how something might need to be marketed differently, even though it is also mainstream.
I'll just speak to my experience. I've been in comics for probably 15 years or so. I had an internship at a large publisher and I thought this was going to be my big break, you know. But the advice I kept getting was not to focus on anything queer or gay or even to play up my own homosexuality. And also to change my last name because it sounded too foreign. They were afraid it was going to turn off the prospective readers. And so to get my name on like a Superman comic or a Captain America comic is such a vindication. And to see kind of fans react positively to that is something that I never would have expected in my lifetime. And it took a lot for me to kind of like overcome personally and internally to want to do comics after getting that kind of feedback. So, I mean, it definitely something I work at every day.
I think I've been very lucky so far with my experience. I never had this kind of bad experience in the professional field. I try to think not so much as companies as this amorphous, like unified entity. I know it's it's not like that. It's the people that make it, and I've been very lucky to work with the right people. You know, the ones doing the show and caring for their talent. And I think that's another slow process we're witnessing, how more and more queer and marginalized people are taking the editorial places, and eventually it will get to positions of more power, I hope. Your question included how we dealt with limitations and such. I know. I think like in any collaboration, there's always some level of concession or limits, but I always try to focus on what can be done, which usually is there's room to focus on what you can do positively.
I feel very fortunate where I'm coming from webcomics to print, where I already have like a niche of people specifically finding my work because like I'm queer and stuff like that. And feeling really lucky that like Scholastic are interested in picking up my magical boy story. And like I thought that would take, still for a few more years before anyone would take that story to publish. I was always thinking I would have to crowdfund it to be able to have it out there. So like I feel really lucky in that aspect. And then like having my the Magical Boy was originally released weekly, so I had the benefit of also having like that immediate feedback from fans of being really excited, and this is like showing me like people want this. And the most rewarding thing is just to see comments saying like how much it helped people with their gender identity, their sexuality, and even more so when like those outside the community have mentioned it helped them understand what being trans and what the struggles are, and saying it helped them become less transphobic, and it just made creating that comic so much more worthwhile. And it's so exciting to like experience and like see how much more it would help people becoming print from Scholastic, and then like getting to more people and seeing how people will react to it is also kind of scary because now it's going to be in a more wide audience, and I'm not sure how other people will um, feel about it. But just knowing that because it'll become print, that people have said like I could finally bring this to my library or bring it to my LGBT club and share it with there are other people who are like experience the same thing, and I think that's very exciting.
We're currently in a world that's fresh from a pandemic, when racism, sexism, classism, ageism, homophobia are still being used to divide us, but we're all putting our voices forward to help end those. How does creating art and comics help in this? And as our audience becomes more diverse, and Hollywood has helped make the stigma of being in comics change. Um, how has that helped us?
I'll go first. So for me, the past, I guess 5-6 years, and kind of the turmoil that has happened has been, even before COVID, was a really interesting and odd space to be, because I come from, I guess, a lower economic strata or whatever, born and kind of raised in the projects and things like that, with several different marginalizations. And like living in New York, it became a thing where the thing that changed the most for me was the amount of anxiety, um, personally and as a creator. Um, one of the reasons for that is that a lot of what suddenly non-marginalized folk were starting to worry about was going to happen to them, were the lived experiences of either myself or my friends and family. So it was like, oh, everyone's just kind of imagining what if they were in my situation, but then also on the flip side, this anxiety of what does worse look like, and that being really scary. And then on a personal level, when COVID hit, it was really difficult for me because about a week, 2 weeks before New York City lockdown, I had kind of my first big like prose event, checking panel at the Strand off the bucket list. And then I was supposed to, go to Emerald City for the first time. library conventions. Like, it was supposed to be like a big like couple of months for me, and then suddenly everything was locked down. And I had just reached the point where my friends in mainstream comics who were junior editors were like, with the resume I'd started to make, were like, we can convince our bosses to, let us hire you on and see what you can do with these bigger licenses. But it was a struggle because everyone went pencils down for several months, and I really thought that I had lost the momentum of my career for a minute there, and that like I was just kind of gonna get eaten up by the COVID in like a more in a less medical sense, I guess. But a lot of us have experienced that. So I was really fortunate though that when editors were able to find work, I had friends, who'd be like, it's only 10 pages, but like I got the okay to hire whoever I wanted. So can you do this? And that is kind of, I think, the most important part about surviving all of this chaos, is that kind of reaching out to each other and being there for each other. And I try to continue to do that, even if it's something like I have to say no to something, but I try to keep in mind what all my friends want to be working on. So I can say I can't do it, but I know who can. And that's the way we survive, a combination of that and being really honest with our work emotionally, both writing, like the struggles, but also the honest images of what joy looks like for us as queer folk, both in contemporary and fantasy and superhero and all of that. And yeah, I guess that's kind of it.
I think a lot of my experience working at the Cartoon Art Museum has created a new perspective for me on a lot of things. We always have to take this approach of what's going to get somebody in the door and what's going to expose them to something they never thought they might be interested in. So, getting someone in the door through a really, really cool exhibit, like perhaps a Wonder Woman exhibit that might be opening at the Cartoon Art Museum later this summer. Andy, do you want to add something? I know I can't mention Wonder Woman and not let you speak. So, we get people through the door by connecting them to these movie experiences, having costumes, and then we surround those things with the source material, with the comics that made it possible for them to see these things in Hollywood. And then we also make sure that we have other spaces that expose them to the wider variety of what comics is. We have exhibitions like March. We have emerging artists like Jen Wang's Prince and the Dressmaker. We have Maya Kobe's Genderqueer. We have, all of these stories that are based on personal experiences. They just refuse to not be honest. And those are the books that like people come in for the Wonder Woman show, but the things that we constantly have to reorder to supply for the museum gift shop are the books that are related to those such like these honest emotions, whether they are fictional or non-fictional, something that says something true about the human experience that really reaches into these feelings that we all have. I think a driving force of comics and understanding who we are as people actually comes from when I worked at the Schultz studio. And one of the questions Schultz would get asked is sort of like, why, I'm paraphrasing here, is like, why is Charlie Brown such a loser? And paraphrasing his answer, it's like, because we can all relate to being a loser way better than we can relate to being a winner. So many more of us have had that experience of not winning, that just connects us all together. And I think that struggle is something we can share very powerfully with comics. And that connection is what winning is.
The quote unquote mainstreaming of comics through the movies and stuff, Nina's definitely right that unfortunately it doesn't drive the sales numbers that we would like to in the book world. But the fact that we have mainstreamed those characters does make it easier to move forward in new directions. And when we get queer representation on the screen, it makes it easier to go back to these groups of largely cis white men who are running the companies and give them this physical evidence to say, look, it works. Like, we can market this. So while there's some negatives to it, I'm overall just honestly overjoyed that people know who Iron Man is, because it creates spaces for us, really. And now we get to do things like in the Mighty Valkyries book that we're doing with Jason Aaron and Torrin Groenbeck and Mattia de Ulis, we introduced a lesbian Valkyrie. And, I don't know that I would have been able to make that argument 4 years ago. So I'm grateful for all of the spaces that are opening up in pop culture.
So it's been a fantastic panel so far, but we need to wrap it up, unfortunately, because of time limitations. So I'm going to ask each of you really quickly to provide us with what do you have coming up that you are excited about and you want to make sure people know about?
Well, Danny and I are doing Champions for Marvel, and also in the DC Pride anthology with an equal story written by Andrew Wilder, and in the Marvel Voices anthology with a story that Sarah asked me to write myself, and I'm very honored and proud of that. So that's it mostly for me, and some cover work, and we'll see what else in the future.
I mentioned Mighty Valkyries. That book is continuing. We're wrapping up our current story arc and looking forward to doing some more with those characters. I'll also plug a book that I don't actually work on called Reptile, but that's written by Terry Bloss. It's a blast. The covers on it are awesome, and that focuses, of course, Terry is queer, and that book has some queer characters in it as well. And the Marvel Voices Pride Anthology comes out June 23rd. I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to keep doing them every year, because that book has been a joy, and there are so many people that I didn't get to include this time that I'm hoping to wrap into future books.
So obviously, Luciano and I are doing Champions, and I feel very confident in saying it's some of the most fun I've had creating a book, working with Luciano, and we're really collaborative about it, and it's been super duper fun. Also, upcoming in the fall, I think, I am doing Transformers for the first time, and I am an incredible robot nerd, and I've been having a lot of fun over there, and so I hope people enjoy that when it comes out. And if we're plugging books that we're not working on, the X Office in general is coming out with some really amazing stuff that, the creators there, all of them, but of course, like Vita and Teeny and Leia, you just feel really seen in those books. There's plenty of queerness to support both on the page and off the page over there.
I'm not sure if I could talk about my other plans for Magical Boy, but I do want to mention a personal crowdfunding project that I am working on. Since Magical Boy is about a fictional trans man, I wanted to pay the success of the story forward by featuring a diverse group of real, out, and proud trans and gender nonconforming artists in a comic anthology where they can share their personal experiences in comic form. And I have plans to launch it in Kickstarter this summer of 2021, and links and information will all be on my website and social media at the GAO.
The United States of Captain America came out on June 30th, so you can find that at your local shop. I have another Marvel project coming out, which is unannounced. I have some video game projects that are queer that are unannounced. So I'll just leave it at that. And I have a nonfiction book from the Shirley imprint about Washington's gay general, von Steuben, that should be out in 2022.
I am very excited again about that Wonder Woman exhibit coming up with the Cartoon Art Museum this summer. We are open again. I am also really excited about the Prism Awards ceremony weekend that's going to take place online again for the second time. We had a great weekend celebration last year, and we are thrilled to do it again. And we hope that you check out prismcomics.org to find out more about the Prism Awards and the weekend celebration coming up. We'd be happy to have you join us.
I'm gonna go last here since I'm the moderator. I just did six books here for Abdo Press that are a wonderfully diverse set of modern fairy tales. I continue to work in comics and in the Hollywood arena and so forth, but I do have a really special guest who's coming on for a special announcement. All the way from Hawaii, please welcome Robert Tripto.
Aloha, everyone. I'm taking some time off from life in paradise to let you know something pretty amazing is happening. As you know, I was one of 3 editors of Gay Comics, and I was the one who fetched it out of the editor's trash can when I was working at the Sentinel, and insisted on reviewing it because I knew it was historic. In 1980, it was the first humor publication for gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, and every other member of our community. And many years have gone by, and I find myself once again in the situation of being able to present gay comics to the world again, because Andy Mangels and I are going to release the complete Gay Comics. All the issues of Gay Comics that came out under the editorship of Howard Cruz, myself, and Andy Mangels, 25 issues plus a couple of special issues will be collected and, and printed in hardback form in 2 volumes and a box set. The best images we can get coming out from Fantagraphics Books sometime next year. And it's going to be out there for history because it's part of history. And I'm quite happy and proud to be saying I'm working on Gay Comics again. So mahalo and aloha, everyone.
Thank you, Robert. I am so excited to be working on this project with you. Having been a fan of the work of Howard Cruz, who founded Gay Comics, and yourself, who preceded me as editor, it's I think a blessing to our community that we're going to be able to present this in as complete a form as possible and really get the historic work of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans creators from throughout our comic history into your hands once again in this hardcover box set. So we want to thank our panelists today. You've all been great. Thank you very much. Give yourselves a round of applause, not next to your microphones. And thank you. Please follow the works of Josh Trujillo, Luciano Vecchio, Sarah Brunstad, The Cow, Nina Taylor Kester, and Danny Lohr, and other queer creators in the industry. Thank you again, everybody. It's been fantastic. And we'll see you next year here at Out in Comics.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Andy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.